The boy in white may not be trying to save the people trapped in the town. He may be waiting for someone, one specific person. And if that is true, then almost every appearance he has made since the beginning of From takes on a completely different meaning. Because the strange thing about the boy in white is not that he appears. It is when he appears. He never stays long. He rarely explains anything. He points, watches, warns, or simply stands there as if he already knows what is going to happen. That makes him look like a guide. But what if we have misunderstood his role completely? What if he isn't leading the people toward freedom? What if he is waiting for the one person capable of completing something that has been unfinished for decades? And this is where it gets darker. Because the town has always behaved like a machine. People arrive. They become trapped. They discover pieces of an older mystery. They suffer. They uncover something. And then another person arrives who seems strangely connected to the past. The boy in white is always somewhere inside that cycle. Which raises the question nobody has properly asked. What if the boy in white isn't waiting for everyone to escape? What if he is waiting for the right person to arrive? And what if that person is already in the town? Look at the first major clue. The boy in white doesn't behave like the monsters. He doesn't hunt. He doesn't manipulate people in the same obvious way. He doesn't need to pretend to be human. Instead, he appears almost like a memory, a child, a figure from another time. Something that shouldn't still exist. And yet, he repeatedly interacts with people who are connected to the town's deepest secrets. That matters. Because in From, children are almost never random. Children represent memory. They represent innocence. But more importantly, they represent unfinished history. And the boy in white may be the physical embodiment of exactly that. An unfinished event. Something that happened long ago and was never resolved. But here's what changes everything. If the boy in white has been trapped in this supernatural system for so long, why doesn't he simply leave? Why doesn't he reveal everything? Why does he only give fragments? Why does he allow people to discover the truth slowly? Unless he can't tell them. Unless his existence is tied to a rule. A rule that requires someone else to complete the process. And that would explain one of the strangest patterns surrounding him. He doesn't appear to everyone. He chooses people. He appears to those who are already beginning to see things that ordinary people cannot see. And among those people, one character has always been especially important. Victor. Think about Victor's relationship with the boy in white. Victor has known him for decades. That alone is extraordinary. Most people in the town barely survive long enough to understand what is happening. Victor has survived generation after generation of horrors. And throughout all those years, the boy in white remained part of his world. But Victor doesn't seem to fully understand him. That is the detail everyone missed. Victor remembers the boy. He remembers what happened around him. But memory and understanding are not the same thing. Victor may have spent his entire life assuming the boy was helping him when the truth could be much more complicated. Maybe the boy wasn't protecting Victor. Maybe Victor was simply not the person he was waiting for. And suddenly, Victor's entire story becomes more tragic. Imagine being trapped in a nightmare for decades. You see a strange child. The child appears when something terrible is about to happen. Sometimes he points you toward safety. Sometimes he disappears. Sometimes he seems to know what is coming. You would naturally believe he is trying to save you. But what if he is only keeping you alive? Not because you are the chosen one, but because you are necessary until the next person arrives. That possibility changes the meaning of Victor's survival. He may not be the answer to the town. He may be the keeper of the evidence. The person who survived long enough to remember what everyone else forgot. And that makes Victor incredibly important. Because if the boy in white is waiting for one final person, someone has to preserve the story until that person arrives. Victor may have been doing exactly that without realizing it. And this connects directly to the way the town treats memory. People forget. People repeat patterns. People rediscover the same symbols. The same locations become important again. The same kinds of visions return. It's almost as if the town is constantly resetting the players while preserving certain pieces of information. But Victor remembers. He remembers the trees. He remembers the children. He remembers the tunnels. He remembers things other people have erased from their minds. And that could be why the boy in white stayed connected to him. Not because Victor was destined to escape, but because Victor was destined to remember. Now, consider another strange detail. The boy in white doesn't seem desperate. That is unusual. If he were simply a trapped child trying to escape, you would expect fear. You would expect urgency. Instead, there is often an eerie calmness to him. He watches. He waits. He appears almost certain that events will eventually reach a particular point. That's not the behavior of someone searching for an escape. That's the behavior of someone waiting for a condition to be fulfilled. And that gives us the central theory. The boy in white is waiting for the final person who can break the cycle. Not necessarily the strongest person. Not necessarily the smartest. Not necessarily the person who understands the town best. The person whose presence completes whatever unfinished event created this place. And this is where the story becomes much more dangerous. Because if the boy in white knows who that person is, then the monsters may know too. Think about it. The monsters rarely attack randomly. They play with people. They speak to them. They exploit their fears. They sometimes ignore opportunities to kill.
Why?
Because perhaps death isn't always the objective. Maybe the town needs certain people alive. Maybe certain characters have roles they haven't discovered yet. And if the boy in white is waiting for one particular person, the monsters could be trying to prevent that person from ever reaching the truth. That would mean the conflict isn't simply humans versus monsters. It would be the people trying to complete the cycle versus the people trying to stop it. And the boy in white would be standing somewhere in the middle. Not hero, not villain, but a witness to something that happened before anyone currently trapped in the town was born. And there's one more possibility that makes this theory even more disturbing. What if the final person isn't someone who will arrive from outside? What if the final person is already there? What if the boy in white has been watching them for years? And what if the reason he hasn't revealed himself yet is because they aren't ready? Because seeing the truth too early can be more dangerous than not seeing it at all. Jade learned that. Tabitha learned that. Boyd learned that. Victor learned it decades ago. The town doesn't simply hide information. It gives people information when it wants them to have it. So perhaps the boy in white is following the same rule. He is waiting, watching,
Testing.
and when the final person finally understands what the others could not, the boy in white will no longer need to guide anyone, because his waiting will finally be over. But here's the terrifying question. What exactly happens when the person he has been waiting for finally recognizes him? Because if the boy in white has been preparing for that moment for decades, then the real mystery isn't who the final person is. It's what the boy in white needs them to do. And if that answer is what Season 4 is slowly moving toward, then the town may not be trapping people anymore. It may be preparing them. And the person the boy in white is waiting for may be the one person capable of ending everything, or starting it all over again. But if the boy in white is truly waiting for one final person, then we have to confront the most uncomfortable possibility of all. What if he already knows who that person is? That would explain why his appearances feel so deliberate. He doesn't wander through the town like a lost child. He appears at moments when someone is approaching a discovery, a decision, a memory, a threshold, and then he disappears. That pattern suggests something important. The boy in white may not be controlling events, but he may be monitoring them. And there is a huge difference. A controller needs to create the outcome. A watcher only needs to wait for it. This changes the way we should look at every person who has encountered him. Victor is the obvious example. For decades, Victor has treated the boy in white as something familiar, almost comforting.
But why?
Victor has witnessed some of the most horrifying things in the town. He knows that appearances can be deceptive.
He knows that voices can lie.
He knows that the dead can return. Yet when the boy in white appears, Victor rarely reacts as if he is looking at an enemy. That tells us Victor may have learned something about him long ago, something he has never been able to explain. And perhaps the reason Victor struggles to explain it is because the boy never actually gave him the answer. He only gave him directions. That's not the real mystery. The real mystery is why the directions mattered. If the boy in white was simply trying to save Victor, he could have told him more. Instead, he repeatedly pushes people towards specific locations, objects, or discoveries. That suggests his purpose isn't rescue. His purpose is progress. He wants the right pieces to move into the right places. And Victor may have been one of those pieces, but not the final one. This is where the theory becomes much more interesting, because the town seems to operate through cycles. Someone arrives. They discover the impossible. They begin seeing visions. They find symbols. They uncover older versions of the same mystery. Then they become part of the story themselves. The cycle continues. And every generation seems to get slightly closer to something. That means the people trapped in the town may not be the first group to attempt escape. They may be the latest attempt. And the boy in white could be the one constant surviving between those attempts. A witness who remembers the previous cycle. A figure who knows that certain people must eventually appear. And if that's true, then his relationship with Victor becomes even more significant. Victor may have survived because the town needed someone who could carry memories from one cycle into another. He became an archive, a living record, and the boy in white may have been protecting that archive. Not Victor himself, his memory. That would explain why Victor's drawings are so important. People often treat them as childish drawings. But what if they're actually fragments of a much larger memory system? Victor draws what he cannot fully explain.
Trees.
Creatures. Children. Events. Places. He doesn't necessarily understand the meaning when he draws them, but the images remain. And years later, other people begin discovering connections. That is exactly how a hidden system could preserve information. The town destroys people. The town confuses people. The town erases memories. But Victor keeps drawing. And perhaps that is precisely what the boy in white needed him to do. Now look at the next layer. The boy in white has a strange relationship with death. He looks like a child who should have grown older. But he hasn't. That alone suggests that his existence may be disconnected from normal time. And if his existence is outside ordinary time, then the phrase waiting for someone becomes much more literal. He may have been waiting for decades, possibly longer. For him, the arrival of a particular person may not feel like a distant future. It may simply be the next stage of a process that has already happened before. And this is where it gets darker. What if the boy in white has seen the same people before? Not literally the same faces, but the same roles. The protector, the survivor, the child,
The skeptic.
the believer, the person who sees the symbols, the person who hears the voices, the person who refuses to give up. Maybe the town doesn't repeat individual lives. Maybe it repeats functions. And every time the pattern repeats, someone gets slightly closer to breaking it. That would explain why the characters seem strangely connected to people from the past. The town isn't just haunted by history. It may be reconstructing history. And the boy in white could be the one figure capable of recognizing the pattern. Now consider the possibility that the final person isn't someone who needs to be rescued. Maybe they need to be recognized. Perhaps the boy in white has been waiting for someone who can see him without fear. Someone who understands what he actually is. Because almost everyone who encounters supernatural forces in the town immediately asks the same question. Is it good or evil? But maybe that question is wrong. The boy in white may not belong to either side. He may be a consequence, a remnant, a surviving piece of the original event. And if the person he is waiting for can understand that, then they may finally uncover what the town really is. Not a prison built for the people who arrive, but a mechanism designed around something that happened long before them. Something that requires specific people to repeat specific actions. And if one person refuses to play their assigned role, the entire system could collapse. That might be why the monsters are so interested in psychological manipulation. They don't always need to kill someone. They need them to behave predictably. Fear makes people predictable. Grief makes people predictable. Hope makes people predictable. The town survives because people keep reacting exactly as expected. But someone who understands the rules can break them. And perhaps the boy in white is waiting for that person. Someone who doesn't simply ask, "How do we escape?" but asks, "Why does this place need us here?" That single question changes everything. Because escaping the town and ending the town may be two completely different things. And maybe every previous attempt failed because the people focused on escape. The final person may be the first one who realizes that the exit is not the objective. The objective is to understand why the door exists. This could also explain why the boy in white never simply leads everyone out. Maybe he can't. Maybe he isn't allowed to. Or perhaps he knows that removing one group of people would accomplish nothing. Another group would eventually arrive. Another cycle would begin. Another group would see the same symbols. Another person would hear the same voices. Another child would become part of the mystery. So the boy waits. Because he isn't looking for survivors. He's looking for someone capable of ending the repetition itself. And now we can reinterpret his silence. His silence may not mean he doesn't know. It may mean he knows too much. Imagine knowing the truth, but being unable to reveal it directly. Imagine watching people repeat mistakes you have already seen. Imagine knowing that if you tell them too early, they will fail again. So you point. You wait. You appear. You disappear. You leave just enough information for them to continue. That makes the boy in white one of the most tragic figures in the entire mythology. Because he may not be leading people toward danger. He may be desperately trying to lead them toward the one moment that has never happened before. The moment when someone finally understands the entire pattern. And that brings us to the most important character question. Who is capable of doing that? Who can connect the visions, the children, the symbols, the cycles, the monsters, and the strange rules? Who has already crossed the boundary between the physical world and whatever exists underneath it? And more importantly, who has been seeing things that other people cannot? Because if the boy in white is waiting for one final person, that person may already be standing directly in front of him. They just haven't realized what the boy is waiting for.
Yet.
And when they finally do, the boy in white may stop appearing as a mysterious child. He may finally reveal what he has been all along. Not the guide to the mystery, but the last surviving piece of it. And if that is true, then the moment he finally reaches the person he's been waiting for won't be a rescue scene. It will be a revelation. Because the boy won't be saying, "Follow me." He'll be saying without words, "You finally remembered." And that is where the entire mythology of From could change. Because if someone remembers what the town has been trying to make everyone forget, then the cycle may finally have something it has never had before. A witness who knows the truth. And a person who refuses to repeat the past. But there is still one terrifying problem. If the boy in white has been waiting this long, what happens if the final person arrives and chooses the wrong side? Because perhaps the boy isn't waiting for a hero. Perhaps he's waiting for someone who can open the door. And we have no idea yet what is waiting on the other side. And this is where the theory reaches its most disturbing conclusion. The boy in white may not be waiting for someone to escape the town. He may be waiting for someone to remember why the town exists. That distinction changes everything. Because if the town is built around an unfinished event, then escaping it would never truly solve the problem. Someone could leave. Another person could arrive. The monsters could remain. The cycle could continue. The symbols could return. The visions could begin again. Unless someone finally reaches the beginning. And that may be the purpose of the boy in white. Not to show people the exit, but to guide them backward. Back through the memories. Back through the symbols. Back through the children. Back through every person who came before. Until someone finally discovers the original event that created the entire nightmare. Look at what the show is actually telling us. The past in From never stays in the past. Old events appear through visions. Old symbols return. Old stories suddenly become relevant. People who should be gone continue influencing the living. The town behaves as if history isn't something that happened. It is something that is still happening. And if that is true, then the boy in white may not actually belong to the present. He may belong to the beginning. That could explain why he never ages in the way a normal human child should. He isn't simply a child trapped inside the town. He may be a piece of the original event that somehow survived. A living reminder of what happened. And if he has remained there through every cycle, then his waiting becomes almost unbearable. Decades pass. People arrive. People die. People forget. But he remains, waiting for one person capable of seeing the same truth he sees. That is why the final person matters so much. They don't necessarily need supernatural strength. They don't need to defeat the monsters physically. They need something far more dangerous. They need to understand the rules. Because every prison becomes weaker once the prisoner understands how it works. And the people in From have spent years trying to survive the symptoms. The monsters, the night, the roads, the visions, the tunnels, the voices. But maybe none of those are the actual problem. They are symptoms of something much larger. And this is the detail everyone missed. The town constantly gives people opportunities to understand it. But those opportunities are hidden inside trauma. A terrifying vision becomes a clue. A death becomes a message. A symbol becomes a map. A strange child becomes a guide. A nightmare becomes a warning. Nothing is ever simply what it appears to be. Which means the boy in white's greatest weapon may not be his ability to appear. It may be his ability to make people look in the right direction. Victor saw him. Others saw him. But seeing him wasn't enough. Someone must eventually understand what his appearances mean. And perhaps that is the person he has been waiting for. The one person who won't treat every supernatural event as an isolated mystery. The one person who realizes that every strange event is part of the same machine. And once that person sees the pattern, the entire town becomes vulnerable. Because patterns can be broken. But there is another possibility. A much darker one. What if the boy in white isn't waiting because he wants the cycle to end? What if he is waiting because the cycle requires him to wait? Maybe he is not the master of the system. Maybe he is its prisoner too. That would explain his strange behavior. He doesn't command. He doesn't attack. He doesn't openly reveal the truth. He simply appears when certain conditions are met. Like a piece on a board that cannot move until someone else makes the correct move. If that is true, then the boy in white isn't the ultimate power. He's another victim. And perhaps the final person is the only person who can free him. Now think about what that would mean for the town. The monsters may not be the original evil. The voices may not be the original evil. The forest may not be the original evil. The entire supernatural system may have been created as a consequence of something much older. Something involving sacrifice. Something involving children. Something involving people making a choice they believed would save themselves. And if the boy in white was connected to that event, then his entire existence could be the result of someone else's decision. He isn't waiting because he enjoys the game. He's waiting because he has no choice. And that makes his smile even more horrifying. Because imagine being trapped inside a nightmare for decades and still smiling whenever someone approaches. That isn't happiness. That could be recognition. He may know that every new arrival represents another chance. Another possibility. Another person who might finally break the pattern. And perhaps that is why his appearances feel strangely hopeful even when they lead toward terrifying discoveries. He isn't promising that everything will be okay. He's saying, maybe this time. Maybe this person will understand. Maybe this person will remember. Maybe this person will finally do what everyone before them failed to do. And if Season 4 is pushing this mythology forward, then the boy in white's next appearance could be more important than any monster attack. Because the moment he appears to the final person, the relationship changes. Until now, the question has been, who is the boy in white? But the better question is, why has he chosen this person? That question could unlock the entire story. Because selection implies purpose. If he appears randomly, he's just a supernatural mystery. If he appears according to a pattern, he's part of a system. And if he appears specifically to one final person, then that person is the missing key. Maybe they've inherited something. Maybe they've repeated something from the past. Maybe they've already seen the boy without understanding what they were looking at. Or maybe the most terrifying possibility is that they aren't the first version of this person. Maybe the town has been waiting for the same role to return. Again, and again, and again, until someone finally succeeds. That would make the entire story feel less like a normal supernatural horror series and more like a failed experiment being repeated until the correct result appears. The town isn't simply asking, can these people survive? It's asking, will one of them finally do something different? And the boy in white may be the observer recording the answer. Which brings us back to Victor. Victor survived long enough to become the memory of the town. But perhaps he was never meant to finish the story. He was meant to preserve it.
He was the bridge.
The person who remembered enough for the next generation to continue. And that means his tragedy may be much bigger than we thought. Victor may have spent his entire life waiting without realizing that he was waiting too. Waiting for someone else. Someone who would arrive and finally make all those memories meaningful. Someone who could look at his drawings and see a complete picture instead of disconnected fragments. Someone who could hear the boy in white silence and understand it as a message. Someone who could finally say, "I know what you're waiting for." And if that moment happens, the boy may not need to guide anyone anymore, because his purpose will be complete. But here's the final twist. What if the person he's waiting for isn't destined to save everyone? What if they're destined to make the ultimate choice? Break the cycle. Or become its next guardian? Because perhaps there has always been someone at the center of this place. Someone who must understand the truth. Someone who must decide whether the town continues. And maybe every previous cycle failed because the person reached the truth too late. This time could be different. This time, someone may reach the truth while the system is still vulnerable. And if that happens, the boy in white could finally stop waiting. Which means the most terrifying scene in season May 4th not involve a monster. It may involve a quiet meeting. A person standing alone. The boy in white appearing in the distance. No attack. No scream. No explanation. Just that familiar stare. And for the first time, instead of walking away, the person walks toward him. Because they finally understand. The boy isn't asking them to follow. He's asking them to remember. And once they do, every mystery we've been treating separately could collapse into one answer. The children. The symbols. The cycles. The monsters. The visions. The town. The boy in white. All connected to one original event. One mistake. One unfinished choice. And one final person who has finally arrived. So maybe the boy in white was never the mysterious child waiting for someone to save him. Maybe he was the countdown. A reminder that the town story has always been moving toward one final encounter. And when that encounter happens, the question won't be whether the people can escape. It will be whether they can survive the truth. Because if the boy in white has been waiting for one final person for all these years, then that person has already been chosen. And the moment they finally meet him, the town may stop asking, "Who will survive?" It may finally ask the question that should terrify everyone. Who will become the next boy in white?